Welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, I want to discuss what I will be calling Platonic Hylomorphism. And I believe Book 3 begins to introduce the reader to the notion of hylomorphism. Now, Plato never uses that word, but the concept is all over, not just the Republic, but I think many of his other dialogues, the Phaedo especially. I think what hylomorphism is that there are two fundamentally different ways of understanding or explaining something and showing that both are necessary for a complete picture. And so to interpret Plato as a dualist, or as what's commonly known as a substance dualist, where he takes the soul and the body to be these different things that are extrinsically related, is, I think, just a bad interpretation of what Plato's up to. And I believe Book 3 gives us evidence for that, because what you get is that the guardian, in order to order society justly, or for an individual to be just, they need to be able to know what order is. And how they come to know what order is through themselves being ordered. And that is what education brings about. Education is the formation of an orderly existence. And there are different ways that the human can have an orderly existence, or stating it with the vocabulary of the Republic, there are different ways for the human being to be just. They can have a just soul. They can have a just body, meaning their soul can be formed well, and their body can be formed well. And these are really two different ways of forming an individual. But the thing to note is that they're two different ways of forming an individual, but they're not forming two different things. So it's not that the formation of the body and the formation of the soul are really formation of two different things. It's two different ways of forming the same individual. And so within the Republic, what you get that there's a distinction. There's two forms of education, broadly construed, that are discussed within this book. The first being the musical education. One way to frame that or think of that is as education of the soul, and then the other is physical training or physical education, which is, you could say, education of the body. Now, however, what needs to be realized is that the distinction between the education of the soul and the education of the body is not exactly a sharp distinction, in that to educate the soul is something that is completely irrelevant to the body, nor is education of the body completely irrelevant to the soul. And when I say education of the soul and education of the body, the former might seem intelligible, like we probably have some vague, loose handle on what it is to educate the soul. But what does it mean to educate the body? That is probably a strange way of putting things. Rather, you could think of education of the body as more akin to bodily training, bodily formation, forming the body. So if you think of education as a type of formation to properly arrange something or align something, to properly order something, that can happen in the soul. You read books, you study, you think, you ask questions, you take classes, listen to podcasts to try to better align yourself, order yourself, direct yourself to the goal of the soul, which is the truth, the knowledge. And you can do the same thing, but in a different way when it comes to the body. So you can arrange the body, you can order the body, you can prepare the body, direct it to its proper goal, which ultimately is something like health. And the relationship between the bodily education and spiritual education, maybe, or psychological. The Greek word psyche is coming from where we get psychological, has its etymology, or it's the etymological root of soul. So the soul and the body are going to be intermingled in a way. And now might be surprising for those that may have heard various things about Plato and Plato's views about the relationship of soul and body, that they're opposed to each other, or that there's this radical distinction. These are different substances. I don't think that's the right way to think of Plato at all. I think that's actually a very incorrect view. Now, it's maybe understandable because there is a very long tradition for taking Plato to be such a dualist. By dualist, what I mean is dual, that he believes that there are these two entities, the body and the soul, and that they are merely related, or they are related merely in an extrinsic manner. But I don't think that that's true. And what we're going to see as the Republic unfolds for us, and we'll already see this in Book 3, is that the relationship between the soul and the body is a rather complex one. It's probably similar to the relationship between, you think about a musical composition. So you have the different notes. You could think of that as just the brute sounds. But then you have the dynamics of the sounds, the tempo and the volume, how loud they are, how soft they are. Different ways of playing the sounds. You have all these different dynamics that give flavor, so to speak, to the notes, to the brute sound, and we even, I think this is a good analogy, because we even speak about, you have to play music with some soul, meaning you've got to put some life into the sounds. If you play a piece, even if it's a really introductory piece. My children are learning violin, and I can't even tell you the number of times I've listened to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on the violin. And someone learning the violin can play that song, and they play all the right notes. But someone who has been playing violin for years and years can play that exact same song, the exact same notes, but it just sounds so much better. There's more life to the way that one of the that one player puts in than the other, and so I think there's a distinction between the notes and the life of the music, or the dynamics of the music. There is a distinction, but it's not one that's as simple as, oh, this is this and that is that. These are the notes over here and those are the dynamics over there. Because I think you have to have both of these things kind of overlapping in a way, right? So you just as you don't have words and letters, you could think of letters or ink. Better analogy. Think of the ink that's on the page in your book. You could think of the ink as like the body, and the words, the formation, the structure, the organization of the ink is like the soul in a certain sense. This is just an analogy, and so the words are a combination of ink and arrangement, or ink and organization. And so, granted, there is a distinction, but the distinction isn't one where ink is one type of object and the organization is a different type of object. Rather, there's only one object, namely what's on the page in front of you. But that one object can be distinguished internally or within itself. And so I think it only makes sense that if this is really your view of the world, that there is something which has within itself a distinction. There's this unity, which is the world, that has within itself, in its being one thing, a type of distinction, then you would want to talk about two aspects of that individual, the formal aspect and the physical aspect. And I think that's what Book 3 is introducing. It's introducing the formal aspect through the analogy or the example of musical education. And we'll talk about what it means to be educated musically. And then physical education. And that's I think a distinction that maps onto, or a distinction that reveals that there is unity and distinction. And so to think of Plato as a substance dualist that takes these two things to be radically separate and only extrinsically related would be really foolish, I think. Now, I don't mean to critique anyone who actually might think this way about Plato. I'm just trying to challenge you to rethink maybe why that might not be the best way to read Plato. In fact, a lot of the Platonic dialogues, especially the Phaedo, comes to life in a whole new way once you start to entertain the possibility that Plato is more akin to what might be thought of as a hylomorphist, because of the fact that you get this unity espousing a distinction. And so there's a type of paradox built into the very nature of physical being. The physical world is something that's this union of opposites, or this unification of two things that seem different. It's the sameness of these two different things into a single life. And now, returning to what we've been talking about in books 1 and book 2, is that unification of the many things into a single life, that's just what justice does. So this is why I think justice for Plato is ultimately rooted in education, because it's this unification of these two different ways of forming, two different ways of organizing. If you think of education as ordering or directing or unifying something, then what justice is going to bring about is it's going to bring about the unity of different things into a single reality. And this happens in many different contexts. As we've already talked about, this is the case for the individual human and for the polis, the city. So this is at the heart of politics and ethics, education, that is, and it's also, I think, at the heart of the analogies we've already mentioned: biology, music, physical training. There's a type of all these various things that need to be taken into consideration. Different tasks, different muscle groups, different sort of goals and potential risks that all need to kind of be brought together or harmonized, right? It's another way to think of it. You need to make a harmony out of all these different things so that they serve a single purpose. This, I think, is at the root of almost every human endeavor. And so if that notion of bringing harmony out of disharmony or order out of disorder is justice, and that's also what education is, then it turns out that justice is education. And if education is ultimately fulfilled in knowledge, then justice finds its fulfillment also in knowledge. So this is something I think we're going to want to keep in mind as we proceed, namely not to think of Plato as espousing a Platonic dualism, but something more like what I'll refer to as a Platonic Hylomorphism, something like a unity of opposites that doesn't forfeit the unity for the sake of distinction, nor does it reduce or get rid of distinction for the sake of unity. Rather, both these things are held together in a way, and that's what justice is. Justice is holding these two as one. It's something that's very significant and yet also at the same time very mysterious.